History of yoga. Well, there is a lot about misunderstanding about where yoga comes from. I'm gonna begin by letting you know that the yoga that we practice today is asana, not yoga as it was first conceived. Most likely, we're talking about asana practice, and this asana practice was developed very, very recently. Um, Originally, there was not this many asanas and vinyasa flow or anything like that. A lot of times, it is quoted that yoga has been with us 5,000 years. This is because they found ruins in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. This is part of Iran or Iraq, no, Iran, that depict Lord Shiva in meditative posture doing yoga practices. This doesn't mean Lord Shiva was doing sun salutes 5,000 years ago or anything like that. In reality, the origin of yoga is lost in the remote past. Nobody really knows where it comes from. But what we do know is that 11,000 years ago, there was an ice age in the earth. So as the earth became filled with ice, only the equatorial civilizations were able to survive, because the north and the south froze the earth. Just the equatorial civilizations survived this ice age. So in all continents in the equatorial belt, the same signs or symbols were found throughout the world. In the Americas and the Europes and the Asia continents, the same symbols were found. And these symbols is where the yogic knowledge comes from. So we know the yogic knowledge that we have today comes from before the ice age, which there's no pre-recorded history. Now, the oldest texts in existence are the Vedas, and the oldest written language is Sanskrit. So we do know for a fact that this knowledge predates all religions, and in fact traces of all religions can be found on the Vedas. And when I mention all religions, I'm talking about Judaism, Christianism, Buddhism, the Muslims. They share common knowledge. You can see it on the symbols. Like, for instance, the six let me see if I can draw it. What it's known as the Star of David, the six-peak star. This is not just for the Jewish community. This symbol is shared among pretty much all religions. You can find it in the well, you don't need to go so far. Look at the symbol for the fourth chakra, and you will see the Star of David right there, because it depicts the top three chakras and the bottom three chakras coming together in the center. Also, another symbol that is very common to this era is the swastika. And swastika is a yogi symbol. There's two types of swastika. counterclockwise swastika and clockwise swastika, and one depicts what it means is to be natural. So because we have a stomach, we eat, and because we have a mind, we think, and because we have sexual organs, we multiply. But to be yogi is the exact opposite, which is the opposite swastika. And it means that because you have a mind, you meditate, and because you have a mouth and stomach, you try to fast, and because you have sex organs, you become celibate. So that's the yogic lifestyle. And also this swastika means knowledge of or possession of knowledge, which is required for the success of civilizations. So it means that these civilizations know when to harvest, when to plant, when to wait, when to rotate crops. This is common knowledge now, but back then it was knowledge necessary for the survival of civilizations. So in reality, we don't know where this knowledge came from. Knowledge is eternal, man is not. So this knowledge it's been passed from generation to generation. As one civilization breathes its last breath, it passes the knowledge to the next. So again, this knowledge is lost in the remote past. Furthermore, the Vedas, the Upanishads, they tell us that this knowledge wasn't created by man. It was heard by rishis. Rishis are seers during meditative states. So these people were doing all sorts of practices trying to obtain meditative experiences, and during these meditative experiences they heard knowledge, and this knowledge was transmitted by vibration, by mantras that they heard in these meditative states, and then they started teaching it to others. They became the rishis. So the knowledge was passed from mouth to mouth. Now, if you have sometime played or tell a secret to someone, and then this person tells somebody else, and then they tell somebody else, and then this last person tells it to you, you will find that the original information changed completely. So how do we know that the information that we got was kept original and not changed? And the way they handled this problem was that they codified the information in mantras, and they timed these mantras and rhymed the mantras, and they're written like that in these long texts in rhymes. So for instance, the opening, I'll go into that now. The opening mantra for the Ashtanga Vinyasa sequence. Vande Gurunam Charananavinde Sandarashita Swatma Sukava Bode Nistreya Se Jangalekaya Mane Samsara Hala Hala Moha Shantie. That is one verse of a very long book that continues like that. Moha Shantie, it's always gonna end in E, like Vande Gurunam Charananavinde Sandarashita Swatma Sukava Bodhe Nistreya Se Jangalekaya Mane Samsara Hala Hala Moha Shantie. So if you continue reading this text, it will say something with because it always ends with that, and it's time. One has 11 syllables, the next paragraph has 13 syllables, the next one has 11 syllables, the next one has 13 syllables. So that way they knew not to mess up the information, because you just learn it how it is and you just repeat it how it is. And that's why these mantras, when they translate them, they don't really make any sense. It's because it's mathematical, timed, rhythmic, codified information. So you read and you translate it and it just doesn't make sense. It's coded. So if you continue the opening mantra of Ashtanga Vinyasa, you will find that it changes because it's a different verse from a different book. Abahu Purushakaram Shankachakrasi Harinam Sahasra Shirsam Shwetam. You see? So that's a shorter time. That one has 7 or 8 syllables each line. And it's from a completely different book. So this opening mantra is 2 verses from 2 different books put together. But these books are really long. And to learn this information and to recite it, it's a practice in of itself. In fact, that's the only practice Pattabhi Jois did after his son died. So that's how the information was kept unchanged, by codifying it in long verses and rhymes. Does that make sense? So this is how we get the information, is in these long codified verses. And this is all compiled in the Vedas. The Vedas is 4 books, and they also change over time and they evolve. So it is important to know that's the origin of yoga. So how come we're doing sun salutes today? How is that relate? How can we put that together? And this is very important because there's a lot of misinformation about this. Okay, and I went with many teachers. They all tried to explain me with their heart how they best understood this, but I did not really get a grip on this until I sat down with Master Mahayogi Andri Lapa. I thank you for this knowledge and understanding, because this is very key. Let me explain to you who Mahayogi Andri Lapa is, so that you understand where this information comes from, because it doesn't come from me. So Andri Lapa is creator of Universal Yoga method of practice of yoga. He was the champion of Olympic Croatia swimming team, all distances, before he became yogi. And then he became scientific developer of Dance of Shiva and creator of missing asanas for yoga. So he has a very good understanding of yoga as a science. And he studied with Pattabhi Jois. He studied with BKS Iyengar as a diplomat invited student from the Indian government, so not just as a regular student. So he was able to study with them, but he also studied with Krishnamacharya's teachers in the mountains, Mount Kailash, also in Nepal. Why am I explaining you all this? Is because he was the only one who really put the sutras of how this knowledge came about together, thanks to his numerous trips to India and his dedication to studies. Because person who's swimming champion at age of 17 has a lot of discipline. So he traveled 40 some times to India to do research. And on these numerous trips, well, like I said, he studied with Patabi Joyce, BKS Iyengar, but also with Krishnamacharya's teachers. And he has explained or been able to explain to me how modern yoga came about. And modern yoga came about basically in the early 1900s. So we're talking about 120 years old practice. Yoga wasn't popular. Nobody was yogi anymore. Yogis were living in the mountains, practicing there. And what happened was, well, one person who came to learn from them in Mount Kailash was Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya was trying to learn, and he was going to these high altitude mountains where nothing grows there. There's only rocks and snow. Okay, there's no fields or anything like this. The yogis there have different type of practices. They're sitting down nude in the cold, placing themselves with wet sheets and evaporating them with their own heat. And these practices may not make any sense to us, but that's what Krishnamacharya was learning. And it was not very easy for him to do. So his teachers taught him Vinyasa method in order to create heat in the mountains in Mount Kailash in extreme weather conditions. So this is what he learned for physical practice. Then he would come during winter down to Mysore area or to warmer areas of India further south to share what he would learn, and then he would back during summer to the mountains and so on. So that's how Krishnamacharya learned. I think he did this for 7 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then this is about in the 1930s. The British were invading India, but they were trying to not do it by force. So they were trying to take over the culture. And because of this, the Maharaj of Mysore, he was a very wealthy man, and he wanted to prove to the British that they were wrong about the Indian culture, and that the Indian culture was rich and vast in culture, and that they had all sorts of things to show to the Brits. So what he did is he hired dancers and magicians and martial artists and painters and yogis to show the British, to demonstrate their skills to the British. So for this purpose, he hired Krishnamacharya. And what Krishnamacharya did was gather a group of kids, students, and taught them a series of sequences that they could show the British. These series of sequences became later as Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga. The kids, they were aged 6 to 14, but there was one kid who was older than all of them. and his name was Patabi Joyce. And at the age of 21, he was the oldest one of this army of kids, yogis, performing for the British. During this time, Krishnamacharya was rubbing elbows with the British all the time. So, because of this, it was Joyce's duty to sub for Krishnamacharya. So, Joyce subbed for Krishnamacharya for 33 years. And it was his duty to learn the sequences. When the British invasion ended in 1945, there was no need for the Krishnamacharya army of yogis to perform anymore. So he kept teaching these sequences on his own, and he inherited them. I'm talking about Patabi Joyce. Now, another student of Krishnamacharya taught individually. He had many students. One of them was Patabi Joyce, another one was Indra Devi, another one was the Sikachar, his son, another one was Iyengar. Now, Iyengar is very interesting because he is most famous yogi, but he was with he was with his guru Krishnamacharya for only 2 weeks. His motivation was mostly financial. He married Krishnamacharya's sister and helped Krishnamacharya become famous through a book that he published through one of his students in England. So Iyengar had back problems. Andre Lapa saw this personally, and he told us how he saw it. He's for sure that he was seeing a back doctor outside of India in secret. Based on this knowledge, we theorize, or he theorizes, that that's how or why he developed safe yoga and alignments on the back, for the back, because he was suffering from back issues himself. So up until Iyengar, there was no alignment. In fact, up until Iyengar, there was no published book of asanas. The previous book of asanas, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, had only 18 asanas, and they are all meditative postures, like sitting down, Sukhasana, Siddhasana, Padmasana. So another student of Krishnamacharya was his son, the Sikachar. Problem was that the Sikachar didn't learn yoga until he was 50, because it wasn't popular to be yoga then. So he was doctor. I think he was civil engineer, and it was popular to be doctor or more Western careers. But by the time he was 50, and Krishnamacharya was becoming famous, Iyengar was becoming famous, Patabi Joyce was becoming famous, then one could once again sell yoga in India and make money. So he decided to finally learn yoga at the age of 50 and inherited the school of Krishnamacharya. So we really here have 4 major schools. School of Krishnamacharya by the Sikachar, School of Indra Devi, School of Patabi Joyce, and the School of Iyengar. But all of them are taught by Krishnamacharya. It should be noted here, Krishnamacharya never practiced himself Ashtanga Vinyasa sequence. An Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga sequence was created to show the British. So they call it traditional yoga, but in the sense of tradition, it's not old. It only has about 120 years maximum of age. So we should really understand this part so that we know where all these modern lineages come from. Now, in reality, Patabi Joyce started teaching Ashtanga Yoga Vinyasa sequence to foreigners, mostly American and British, but also from other countries. And these teachers, who are world famous today, Anna, no Anna Forrest, no, but the Millers, Chuck Miller, Tim Miller, Matthias Ratti, David Swenson, Richard Freeman, all of these people, bless their hearts, because of them we know yoga today. They're great teachers. Now, in reality, they were learning Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga from Patabi Joyce, and they were trying to teach these same sequences to the people in the United States. But people in the United States were not able to do most of these sequences. So these teachers would go back to Patabi Joyce and ask Patabi Joyce if he would modify Ashtanga Vinyasa for these new students. And Patabi Joyce would continuously refuse. Had he modified, then everybody would now be practicing just Ashtanga Vinyasa, nothing else. But he didn't modify. So what happened was that these teachers came to the West and they did modify. Even though Patabi Joyce said don't modify, they did modify. But in order to respect Patabi Joyce, they changed the name. So instead of calling it Ashtanga Vinyasa, they started calling it Vinyasa Flow, Chakra Flow, Power Yoga, which is nothing but Ashtanga Vinyasa simplified. If you notice this, all these styles of asana have the same postures. Chaturanga, up dog, down dog, Warrior 1, Warrior 2, Trikonasana, Parsvakonasana, Paschimottanasana. So all these postures are all based on the Ashtanga Vinyasa sequencing. Basically, all the postures that we know today in styles that are called Hatha and such, Vinyasa Flow, they're the same postures, just simplified. Maybe they do sun salutes without the jump throughs, without the handstand, but they're doing the same thing. And the coordination of the breath is a little lost. So in essence, we have Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga system and watered down Ashtanga Vinyasa. Even styles like Rocket is basically Ashtanga Vinyasa, but they with less postures. So there's nothing new there. It's just a modified version of the same. It should not be considered a new style. New style, for instance, is Universal Yoga by Andri Lapa, where he develops new asanas that are not found in any other system of yoga. That is a new system, but the other ones are not. They're just a modification of the Ashtanga Vinyasa physical asana system. The Ashtanga Vinyasa system is a Hatha yoga system. Hatha means hot, cold, Ida, Pingala, solar, lunar. So the Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga system has both Ha and Tha exercises. There's no need to add any other word to yoga or Hatha yoga. So this is a good time to pause and make an explanation. For instance, there is no need to say, for instance, Yin yoga. What is Yin Yoga? Yin Yoga is, if we have Hatha Yoga, Ha is hot and Tha is cold. Yin Yoga is just Tha Yoga. So when you practice Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga, it has strengthening exercises and it has stretching exercises. It has Ha and Tha. So Yin Yoga is only Tha, not Ha. So it's a narrow system. It's not complete system. And Yin, everybody knows there's Yin and there's Yang, and Yin and Yang means Ha, Tha. So there's no need to add. Saying Yin Yoga is like saying Tha, Hatha. So it doesn't make sense. You can just say Hatha, don't need to say Tha, Hatha. So don't need to say Yin. When you practice yoga, it should be understanding you're practicing everything. And this is just asana, not yoga. Yoga is a more broad practice than just physical practice. There's 5 layers of the being, and each layer has its own practice. So we have a physical layer, there's practices for that layer, but we also have an energetic layer, there's practices for this layer, and then there's also a more subtle mental, emotional, and bliss layer, Satchidananda layers, and there's practices for each one of these layers. So when you think of yoga, people think of doing asana practice, but that's just one of the practices. There's many others. There's cleansings and many other practices. So anyways, this is a very good introduction of the history of yoga. I hope everything is clear, how things came about from old perspective and modern perspective of yoga. And please read the section of the manual entitled History of Yoga and Modern Yoga, and forward your questions to me by email or WhatsApp. Thank you very much. Blessings. Namaste.